Well, good morning and happy holy day to us all. Of course, we know that prior to the start of this festival, these 7 days, we all took the time to carefully remove the leavening from our homes, our cars, personal properties, whatever. And of course, we also know these 7 days of unleavened bread started with, I still can't see you over there unless I slide this out. Hope it doesn't mess up the scheme of things in the whole world, but I want to see their reactions too. Keep them awake. Anyway, we know that it started with a high holy day, and of course we observe the commanded holy convocation on that first day of unleavened bread back on Tuesday. And so for the past 6 to 7 days, however it is you want to count it, we have been eating unleavened bread, and we have been rehearsing the overall major theme of this feast, as well as having correctly focused on the fact that God has symbolically removed sin out of our lives during these 7 days. And as we know, the 7 days of unleavened bread both began and they end with a high holy day. And so we've focused and we've seen various lessons and various things. And so, brethren, we come to the place that I think a good question that we could ask is, what are we supposed to learn from this day, the last day of unleavened bread? I mean, after symbolically having put sin out of our lives for almost 7 days, what happens next? I mean, is this a case of being all dressed up with no place to go? I mean, we've kind of done it all. Sin's been removed. So I ask, what are some of the lessons that we are to learn from the second high holy day, the last day of unleavened bread? I have entitled this message simply as Lessons of the Last Day of Unleavened Bread. And we're going to see some, not all, but some. So with this question in mind, what are some of the lessons? If you would, please go with me to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11. Here we know that Paul gives 2 events that take place on the last day of unleavened bread. And I know we usually refer to Hebrews 11 as the faith chapter, and it begins with the definition of faith. So here we are in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it, by faith, the elders obtain a good report. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were formed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Paul then goes on to describe our spiritual forefathers, their accomplishments, and then from verse 4 through 28, he tells us about Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Joshua. And you know, brethren, I think that if we really think about it, we might more accurately call this chapter the by faith chapter. And the reason is because most of these verses begin with the phrase by faith. We just simply refer to it as the faith chapter. And I know we get it from because we see the definition of it given, but there's so much more. Now, so we're still trying to look at what are some of the lessons that we're to learn from this holy day. These two examples that we want to review from Hebrews 11, they begin in verse 29 and 30. And here, Paul does something. He changes the emphasis from individuals to all Israel. And that is the whole congregation. And so it's significant because it also applies to us. And so in these next two verses, we are given examples of what we are to learn from the last day of unleavened bread. And so go with me to Hebrews 11, verse 29. By faith, they, who are the they? Israel. By faith, the children of Israel passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians tried to also do, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. So when we look into these two verses, we see major lessons for us. So let's look at these two verses in a little more detail and see what we're seeing, or what I hope that we are seeing. Well, the first example is the crossing of the Red Sea in verse 29. And so let's go to reread these verses. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned. So that's the first one. Then in verse 30, we're gonna look at these. We're going to spend a whole lot of time here in these two verses. Verse 30, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. And so, brethren, if we study these two verses, we learn both events took place on the last day of unleavened bread. Is this significant? Of course it's significant. Of course it's significant. We conclude, because we know that the crossing of the Red Sea was on the last day of unleavened bread. And the reason is because it's very clear. I'm not even going to try and prove this point. It's there, it's provable. But since it was 6 days after the Passover, they were at the shores of the Red Sea. So the crossing of the Red Sea took place on the last day of the days of unleavened bread. If we look at Joshua chapter 5, we see Israel observe the Passover, and then they marched around the walls of Jericho for 6 days. Now I know you can say, hold it, they went around 7 days. Well, we'll get to that. Because it was then on the seventh day when the walls of Jericho fell, again, the last day of unleavened bread. So given these two examples, what is it that we're to learn? Are there particular points that we can derive from looking at this, studying these verses, and just taking it in the context of the last day of unleavened bread? What are we to learn about the last day of unleavened bread? So I want us to take a look at some lessons that we can learn from these two examples. Lesson number one is that the last day of unleavened bread is a feast of faith. Faith, F-A-I-T-H. It's a matter of faith. I mean, we consider when the Israelites were ready to cross the Red Sea, they were trapped. They were trapped between the Red Sea and the Egyptians. And of course, the human mind, there was no way out of this predicament. There was no escape route. And the thing is, brethren, this was exactly where or what God wanted them to be. He wanted them to have this sense of, there is no escape, there is no way out. They had to totally depend on God. Therefore, the children of Israel did exactly what every red-blooded male and female would probably do. They complained. They complained bitterly. They complained to Moses, and we know a lot of the story. They complained and told Moses that it would have better for them to have stayed and served in Egypt than to die here out in the wilderness, and they are not even at the wilderness yet. They're still on the Egyptian side of the Red Sea. And I know we are dumbfounded, and we look at this and we go, what? Don't they know? And the answer is no, they didn't know. Just like we don't know when we do the very same kind of thing when we gripe and complain about something that's not going the way that we wanted it to go. But who's in charge? Yet looking at this story, what we know is God acted to save them. We learn a very powerful lesson. It's a statement that I myself use it often, and I know others do too, and that is God's way is always right and it is always good. So he separated the Egyptians from the Israelites with a pillar cloud, and then he parted the Red Sea. And brethren, I think that if any one of us would look at this situation from the human mind and with the mind of Jesus Christ in us, we have to come to the place that it took faith to cross the Red Sea. I mean, think about this. We have these two high walls of water on both sides of us. Some commentaries, it might look like I was probably old enough to be back there sometimes, but really wasn't. But so I don't really know. I'm only going by what some of the commentaries state. But what is happening is the Red Sea is departed. We understand this. We can see this very clearly. So he separates, he parts it, and there's two bodies of water. How did he do this? I don't know. I don't know. What I know is this is what he did. And so we have these two high walls of water on both sides. Some commentaries say the waters could have been as high as 300 feet. And now you're told, now walk through it. And we also know that the wind had been blowing hard all night to dry the land. And so for us to walk through, meaning I'm putting us back at that place, saying us, to walk through, we're going to walk on dry ground. And we were being chased by the Egyptian army. I mean, and after all, 7 days earlier, counting this day, 7 days earlier, every household had someone to die. And you don't think they're going to be kicked off at us? Yeah. So Israel crossed the Red Sea in fear. Yet the thing is, brethren, they did cross the Red Sea. And then if we look at the fall of the walls of Jericho, we see that Israel at that time was greatly reduced in number since they had left Egypt. Now this is 40 years later. And God did something that is absolutely incredible. There's no way any of us can not think about this being incredible. God repeats what he had done back at the Red Sea. I mean, he first parts the Jordan River so that the Israelites could cross over on dry land into the promised land. Joshua chapter 4, Joshua 4 and verse 23. Joshua 4:23. For the Lord your God dried up the rivers of Jordan from before you until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over. He does the same thing at both events. And then, once over the Jordan River, the Israelites observed their first Passover in the Promised Land. Brethren, it was at this time that God instructed Israel on how to capture Jericho. They were to circle Jericho in silence for 6 days. And this procession that was to walk around, to march around in silence for 6 days, was led by the priest with the Ark of the Covenant, and they walked around the walls of Jericho. Joshua 6, verse 3. Joshua 6, verse 3. And ye shall compass or encircle the city, all you men of war. Sometimes I've heard people say, all of the Israelites walked around it. They didn't. I mean, it's a misreading. It's a misunderstanding. They didn't all walk around. It was the men who were the age of war that walked around the city, the priest, and they carried the Ark of the Covenant. All you men of war, and go around about the city once, and they did it each day for 6 days. Thus shall you do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns or shofars. And the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow the trumpets or the shofars. And brethren, any way you want to look at this, we come to realize this is an extremely poor military strategy. I mean, this is not how you would go about conquering a city. Yet, what we notice here is, unlike the Israelites at crossing the Red Sea some 40 years earlier, they did not complain. They had faith. God would give Jericho into their hands. Then on the 7th day, the last day of unleavened bread, the priest blew the shofar. Israel shouted, and the walls of Jericho fell. And so as a result of this, Israel took Jericho boldly, mightily, with great courage, and they destroyed Jericho completely. There was no fear in their attacking the city, unlike the fear of the Egyptians that were behind them at the Red Sea, driving them forward as they had so many years earlier. Yet today, at the walls of Jericho, they attacked boldly. They destroyed everyone within the city, man, woman, and child, except for Rahab and her family. And they did it with great faith. So the first lesson that I see that we can learn or need to learn from the last day of unleavened bread is that this is a feast of faith. Lesson number 2, the last day of unleavened bread is a feast of God's victory. Crossing the Red Sea was what God had done, not what the Israelites had accomplished. I mean, yes, I know they went forward, because remember, originally God told them that they were to, through Moses, they were told to stand still and watch or see what God was going to do to save them, to deliver them. It was because of God's actions that they were saved. Remember I said they were brought to this place and there was no escape? They had no way out. They had no way out. God's action is what saved them. Exodus 14 and verse 13. Exodus 14:13. And Moses said unto the people, fear you not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. Then at Jericho, because remember we're looking at these two events. Then at Jericho, God told Israel when they came into the promised land that the walls of Jericho would fall on the 7th day, the last day of unleavened bread. And Joshua knew that it was by God's hands that the wall fell, not because of the trumpets or the shouting, or even because they marched around the city. Joshua, as a result of this, honored God's victory and the fall of the waters of Jericho. And we read, and we will just a moment, but we read where all the gold and the silver and all the vessels of bronze and iron were consecrated. They were declared to be sacred, which is what this word means here. To belong to the Lord God, and they were to put all of this into the treasury. Joshua 6 and verse 19. Joshua 6:19. And all the silver and gold and vessels of brass and iron are consecrated unto the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord. So lesson number 2 for the last day of unleavened bread is the feast. It is a feast of God's victory. Yeah, now Israel benefited from it greatly. Yeah, they did. But that's the lesson. Lesson number 3 is the last day of unleavened bread is a feast of action. When Israel crossed the Red Sea, they were told they were to stand still, see the salvation of the Lord, and then they were told to go forward. God did the work, yet Israel was required to act. Salvation, deliverance was on the other side of the Red Sea. Death was behind them. The Egyptian army, they were there. They could see them. Israel could not stand still. I mean, they had to go forward. Even though God had told Joshua that the walls of Jericho would fall, it was not by their power. Israel obeyed God by marching around its walls. And brethren, please realize the walls fell down was just the beginning. They did fall down. Israel had done what they were told to do. But I said that was just the beginning, because what I mean by this is after the walls fell, Israel was to move straight ahead and take and conquer and destroy the city. The victory was God's, yet Israel's duty was to destroy the city. So lesson number 3 is that the last day of unleavened bread is a day of action. And the fourth, and I have final lesson for the last day of unleavened bread is this, that we are to be bold. Bold, B-O-L-D. And we need to realize size is not the determining factor of success. I want to repeat that. Size is not the determining factor of success. Because I want us to please remember, Israel's size is not mentioned as being important to the parting of the Red Sea. Now, we know we're told the number of people that were there. In essence, we can kind of get a rough estimate. And most commentaries will state that there was anywhere from 2 to 4 million Israelites that crossed over the Red Sea. It's huge, with all the men, women, and children. It's a huge, large number of people. In other words, what we see is there were not too many Israelites to cross the Red Sea. Also, we need to remember there were fewer Israelites at Jericho than left Egypt, because all of the complaining older generation, they had all died out. They died, they marched around for 40 years until they all were dead. And there's even a lesson from there, but I won't go into that. And yet the fewer number was not a factor of victory. There were not too few to take Jericho. So regardless of the number, huge or much smaller, God always fulfills His promise. He is always good and He is always right. And the way He does it is the way, not a way, the way. Yet, brethren, what is important to look at here is, what is Israel's view of the future? How do they look at, how do they view the future that is before them? Well, what we see is it was by faith that Israel crossed the Red Sea. Yet they did so in fear. They were fearful. They were complaining. They complained because they were afraid. I'm not making excuses. I'm just stating the reality of what the facts are. It was by faith that Israel took Jericho, yet they did so boldly, and they did it this time without fear and without complaining. And brethren, this is an important point that we need to realize. The size of the church of God has varied over the centuries. And yet, it is not the determining factor for our success. Size varies, yet God's promises are the same. 1 Corinthians 6, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 6. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 6. I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that plants anything, neither he that waters anything, but God that gives the increase. Now he that plants and he that waters are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are laborers together with God. You are God's husbandry, you are God's building. Some plant, some water, different responsibilities, different administrations, do different things. To plant and to water, these are the two examples that Paul uses. However, it is always God who gives the increase. Or, to put it in the context of the days of unleavened bread, it is God who always brings about the deliverance or the victory or the salvation. Go with me to Zechariah 4 and verse 6. Zechariah 4, verse 6. Then he answered and spoke unto me, saying, This is the word of the Lord unto Zerubbabel, saying, Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. And he's the one who gives us the Spirit. So as we come very close now to the end of these 7 days of unleavened bread, we have a choice before us this day. Do we go forward in fear? See, the Israelites, they crossed the Red Sea. They did it. They got out. God did his part. They had to go forward. They did. And they did it in fear. I mean, is it fear that is going to motivate us? There's a lot of horrible, horrible things going on in the world today. Somebody asked me earlier during the days of unleavened bread, do I think these are the end days? And I said, no. And they said, why? And I said, it's not bad enough yet. We're not at the Red Sea. We still can move about. We can still do things. We are not in a slavery as Israel was. So, as bad as I make that statement, I mean, I want it to be, and I pray, thy kingdom come, and let it be tomorrow, or let it be today. But do I think this is the last day? No. Because it's not bad enough. There may have been, I am not aware of it, of anyone that is part of the Church of God at large has been killed, except maybe by an irate mate or something, which is horrible, that have been killed because they live this way of life. In the century of 1900 to 2000, around that 1,000-year period of time. 1,000-year? Huh? Yeah. There were more people killed during that time that stated they believe that Jesus is the Christ than all prior, all the way back. Not one was part of the Church of God. We know there's going to be martyrs. I'm not trying to be a doomsday here. I'm just trying to look at the reality, because I'm saying we have choices to make here this day. Do we go forward in fear? Is it going to be fear that is going to motivate us? Or do we move forward boldly? And the we here, I'm talking about the church. So I ask us the question, what is my choice? What is your choice? And collectively, what is our choice? What are we going to choose to do? So lesson number 4 is we are to be bold. It was on the last day of the days of unleavened bread that Israel crossed the Red Sea, and it was on the last day of the days of unleavened bread that the walls of Jericho fell, and neither one was accomplished by the might of the children of Israel. It was God who brought deliverance and victory. What was required of the Israelites and what is required of us is faith. It has to start with a knowing of who's in charge. That God's in charge, He's always right, He's always good. It has to start with that. And so the first thing is it has to take faith, knowing that. We do what we do because we have faith that God is going to do what He says He's going to do. And the second thing is it takes action, and it takes being bold. I looked the word bold up because I used it a couple of times in my notes, and I thought, well, I think I know what the word means, but just a dictionary definition. So I looked at it and I went, wow, that even is more profound than I even thought. The word actually means the ability to take risk, being confident, and being courageous. So what was required of the Israelites and what is required of us is faith, action, boldness, confidence, knowing that God is in charge, that He has our back. So, brethren, I want us to get the lesson. I want us to understand the parting of the Red Sea and the walls of Jericho falling would be absolutely meaningless unless Israel followed through and doing what God told them to do and to go forward, to follow through on God's instructions. What if the Israelites on the other side, God parted the Red Sea, the walls are 300 feet high, the wind blows all night, dries the ground out, they're not even going to walk on wet mud, dry ground. What if they didn't go forward? They would have been dead. So the point is, these two events would be absolutely meaningless unless Israel had followed through and done what God's command had told them to do and to go forward, to do His instructions. Brethren, it is the same for us. And like Israel, both at the Red Sea and at the walls of Jericho, we are observing the seventh day of the days of unleavened bread. And now, we, the Church of God, we must go forward. So I ask, how many feasts of unleavened bread will there be? How much longer must we go forward in faith? The answer is, we don't know. We don't know. Should we be discouraged if time goes on? And the answer is, of course not. Of course not. We have two incredible examples, one done in fear and one done in faith, for us to follow for the last day of the days of unleavened bread. But I want us to notice Paul's closing encouraging words to the by faith chapter, Hebrews 11, verse 39. And these all, remember the first several verses he talked about individuals, and then he switched over and talked about the congregation of Israel. So these all, the individuals and the congregation, all of these, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. It did not happen during their lifetime. Please realize, no matter what they did, they have not yet received the promise. Why? Verse 40 tells us, God having provided some better thing for us. The us here is the Church of God today. God has provided some better thing for us, the Church of God, that they, Israel, without us, the church, should not be made perfect. So he's waiting in one way for us. God's going to do his part. Very, very loud lesson for all of the days of unleavened bread. Especially it is, shall we say, screaming loud on the last day of the days of unleavened bread, that God is going to do his part. God's going to do his part. What about us? Brother, we must keep going forward in faith, not in fear, but boldly, until God fulfills his promise, until God provides that better thing for us that we just read in verse 40. God having provided some better thing for us. And so until God provides this better thing for us, we have to keep going forward in faith, boldly, confidence, knowing who's in charge, trusting God, believing God, no matter what. And that better something that he is providing for us and for them is sonship in the family of God. That's what he promised them ultimately, and that's what he has promised us. So we ask, what are we going to do? Happy Holy Day. God bless you all. The Aaronic blessing. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speaking to Aaron and to his sons, saying, on this wise you shall bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. God bless you all. Happy Holy Day. And we love you all very, very much.